Facebook and Twitter. 90.3 KRNU Lincoln.
Up the floor to Trey McGowan. He'll lob it for his...
On 90.3 KRNU, it's Huskers Hoops Live.
You betcha! Jazz Shelley has a triple-double!
Now, here's your host, Jacob Schwantz.
Finals week here in Lincoln, Nebraska on the UNL campus. Welcome in, everyone. Jacob Schwantz here with you on Huskers Hoops Live. Really fun to get back into this season, especially with the way that this year has gone for the men's and women's basketball teams. I mean, it has been a very impressive start for Coach Williams and Coach Hoiberg alike, and we're going to get into all of the action from this past week. And we've got a special guest coming on today. My buddy Justice Rohde will come in at around 8:30 or so, I believe, and we'll be talking men's basketball. And we've got some special news to share with everybody in just a little bit. But like I said, we'll go over last week's games. We'll talk about some of the other big games coming up on the schedule and pretty much everything in between regarding Nebraska basketball. But let's first talk about some of the biggest news in Nebraska ball since last week's episode. And I have to say the biggest one would be Jazz Shelley became the first Nebraska women's basketball player in program history to have 2 career triple-doubles. Really impressive stuff from her to be able to put this type of career together since transferring into Nebraska. I feel like the expectations were high for somebody like Jazz Shelley, and for her to be able to put together this type of a career in just 3 years with the Huskers. She was here in my freshman year. I'm now a junior. It's been awesome to see kind of her growth and accomplishments as a Nebraska basketball player. Of course, if you don't know, she transferred from Oregon. She spent her freshman season there. So it's been pretty fun to watch her make all of these kind of career highs in all sorts of categories, including the 2 triple-doubles. But let's get into the women's basketball from this past week, because it was one of the most impressive weeks that I've seen in a long time from this team. We'll start with a little bit of talk about UNC Wilmington. There was not a lot of competition in this game, unfortunately. Fortunately for Nebraska, though, it was in favor of them. So it was a 108-35 game. Jazz Shelley records her second career triple-double, put up, 19 points, 10 rebounds, and 11 assists. So very efficient, very effective day for Jazz Shelley. The Huskers gave up just 12 points in the entire first half, and they put up 62 points in the first quarter, and then, well, not in the first quarter, in the first half, 31 in the first quarter, 31 in the second quarter. Very consistent offense. I really liked seeing that. That's been kind of a problem with this team at times in the past few years. Just kind of plagues them at different times in the season, where they'll put up, oh, wow, a 20 or 25-point quarter, and then all of a sudden it's 8 or 9 in the next quarter. You just need to figure out a way to be a little bit more consistent in that category. So nice to see, even though it was against lower competition like UNC Wilmington, good to see that high-level consistency by this Nebraska offense. But speaking of the triple-double for Jazz Shelley, you hear it in the intro by Matt Coten near the end of the intro. I was actually on the call as well for that game against NC Central a couple of years ago when Jazz Shelley recorded her first triple-double of her career. And you, like I said, you can hear it on the intro. That's the Matt Coten version. But it was just really cool to think about how she has gone down in Nebraska history. And if I really dig back deep in the files, I can very easily find the call from when she recorded her first career triple-double. Not necessarily her second, but just being part of history like that, I thought was pretty cool to see. But 7 of 10 Huskers in that UNC Wilmington game, they went into double figures. Again, not much that we can really pull from this game just because of the huge gap in talent level and just overall team level. It was very clear that Wilmington was not on that same tier of D1 basketball as Nebraska right now. So Nebraska dominating in this way isn't insanely surprising, but at the same time, it's also very encouraging that when they are supposed to beat a team bad, they can do it. They have the ability to go out and, as a full team, put up their big-time performances when they need to show it the most. So a strong start to the week there, and then this is where the main course of the week happened. On Saturday, the Huskers played Michigan State in women's basketball on the road in East Lansing. And this was a very fun game to watch, very back and forth, but Huskers hit 10 threes, and they ride an 80-74 victory over the Spartans. You got to give it up to them. 2-0 week, Huskers advance to another victory, and they got 13 points, 17 rebounds from Alexis Markowski. I mean, she is just completely dominating this portion of the season. I think that was her 5th consecutive double-double at that point, which is insane. And most of it actually came in the second half. She had a lot of foul trouble in the first half. Didn't get to see too much of Markowski to start the game. So that was kind of always a question mark. You got to wonder, like, when a player gets foul trouble that early and they can't get into any sort of rhythm, are they going to be able to find it later in the game? You don't get going early. You kind of sit on the bench. You get cold again. And are you going to be able to figure out your game once both teams have kind of gotten into their own rhythm and figured out their own rotation and matchups later on in the game? And that's exactly what Alexis Markowski was able to do. So you gotta give her some praise for that. She completely dominated the second half. Most of her rebounds and most of her points were in the second half. And a big reason that Nebraska was able to win this game was not only that second half performance from Alexis Markowski, but also in the first half from Jess Petrie, who was really able to fill in for the foul trouble for Alexis Markowski and just pretty much lead the Huskers offense off the bench. She showed a lot of potential for this team, as this is a very good Michigan State basketball team that was leading the Big Ten in scoring. They were leading the Big Ten in scoring per game, 94 points per game around there. That's insane. That's one of the best offenses in the country, not just the Big Ten. And for the Huskers to come out here and put up this type of performance, I thought was pretty interesting. Jess Petrie finished with 11 points on 5 of 7 shooting off the bench. And you look at the bench numbers from this game. Overall, Nebraska won it by 8, 34-26. So that's a pretty decent margin. That's a margin that probably wouldn't have taken place without somebody like Jess Petrie going off. And it's also interesting. You look at the box score with Kendall Coley off the bench. She had 8 points, and the Nebraska bench outscores Michigan State's bench by 8 points. And I thought Kendall Coley was actually a difference maker in this game. She had 8 points and 3 rebounds, pretty solid physical defense, 2 buzzer beaters as well, one at the end of the first quarter that was a pretty crazy shot, kind of a last second just catch and release almost instantly from the left wing. That was a nice looking shot, swished it right through. And then at the end of the second quarter, she had a nice little mid-range jumper too. So pretty impressive that Kendall Coley can put a performance like that together, not necessarily out of nowhere. She had a solid game against TCU earlier this year, but to be able to come off the bench, put up big shots, and really be the difference. I mean, 8 points for her, 8-point advantage off the bench scoring-wise for Nebraska against Michigan State. So Kendall Coley is not exactly someone they rely on to score a bunch of points, but when she does, it can feel like found money sometimes, and Nebraska's really looking good when Kendall Coley is one of the better scorers in these basketball games. So definitely one of the best games I've seen from her this season. Jazz Shelley went for 11 points, 9 assists, 7 rebounds against the Spartans, almost another triple-double. And you have to think, that's very close to back-to-back triple-doubles, which would have made this week even more insane from Jazz Shelley, seeing as, like I said, she was the first player in Nebraska history now to have 2 career triple-doubles. So if she could do that twice in 1 week, would just be gobsmacking at that point. But looking more down the box score, Natalie Potts, she went 50% from the field, 10 points from her. Overall solid day. Wasn't a huge day that we've seen from Potts in the past in some of these games, but again, very efficient day. It's exactly what we've come to expect from Natalie Potts. And overall, Nebraska just provided a very encouraging, balanced offense in this game and really all week last week. I mentioned how everyone was pretty much hitting on all cylinders against UNC Wilmington. There were 4 scorers in double figures against Michigan State, and every player who had minutes scored at least 3 points against the Spartans. So this Nebraska balanced offense, I think, is going to be needed once kind of that wear and tear of Big Ten play starts to really kind of continue later on in the year. I was working at the Huskers radio network, and on the post-game interview on the broadcast, they were talking with Alexis Markowski, and they were talking about how physical this game was. And this was only game 1 of the Big Ten regular season. So you have to think about how, later on in the year that could come into play. And to have somebody like Jess Petrie making plays, Kendall Coley off the bench for that Nebraska front court is really going to be crucial, in my opinion, to be able to manage all of these tough and physical Big Ten teams. But defensively speaking, I thought it was a great game from Nebraska as well. They held Dee Dee Hageman to just 8 points on 7 shots. She was their top scorer going into this game. And I've really liked the way that Nebraska has been able to shut down other teams' top options over the past few games. You think back all the way to Florida Atlantic with Anaya Hubbard. She got in foul trouble when she was on the court. There was almost nothing there for her to work with. You look at this game with Michigan State and Hageman. Almost the same type of thing. She's held to single digits and just really was not a good day for her. And that was their best scorer going into this ball game. Michigan State didn't have a ton of, 20 or 25 point scorers like we've seen in the Big Ten so far this season, but they're a very balanced offense, and she was the one that leads them usually on a nightly basis. But to see the Nebraska defense be able to come in and pretty much shut her down, I mean, that's impressive, regardless of how good you think she actually is. If you are the top option on your basketball team, Nebraska so far this year has pretty much been able to limit what you do. I would say outside of maybe Creighton, every other game that I've seen has been pretty much a shutdown performance defensively for this Nebraska defense. And there are so many elite number 1 options in the Big Ten. And I know this is not going to be like this every single game for Nebraska, but it's still been encouraging to me because it's going to be something that I keep my eye on as some of these games start to move forward in the year. Is Nebraska going to kind of regress to the normal and to the average of allowing big games from other teams' number 1 options, but nothing special? Or is it going to flip to the other side of things, and that's where we're going to have a problem, is if all of a sudden other teams' best players are starting to have their best games of the season against Nebraska. That's not a winning tendency. If you let somebody like J.C. Sheldon, who can go put up 20 on any given night, but you give up 30 or 34 to J.C. Sheldon, or if you give up, Cheyenne Sellers can get up around 20 per game. If you let her go for 30, if Nebraska routinely gives over the average performances up from every team's top option, that's where the losses are going to start to build one after another. And obviously, you don't even have to mention Caitlin Clark. She is probably going to be the number 1 pick in the WNBA draft if she elects to go there. We just saw this past weekend, actually, with the WNBA lottery, the Indiana Fever picked up the number 1 pick. So if Caitlin Clark does elect to go to the WNBA, she will likely be joining Aaliyah Boston for a pretty dynamic duo up at the WNBA. So that should be pretty fun. But finishing things out on this segment, Nebraska was net number 21 heading into this matchup, and I think that the boost that they will see is going to be a pretty good one. I mean, Michigan State was a 7-1 team. They fall to 7-2. Nebraska advances to even better on the season, and this is a pretty solid basketball team. I have to say it. 2 losses only to Creighton and TCU, who are very, at a minimum, solid teams to maybe good by the end of the year. I don't think those losses are going to look that bad on the schedule at all. But going to step aside here on 90.3 KRNU and the Huskers Hoops Live YouTube channel. We'll come back and start to break down some of this up and down week for Coach Hoiberg's men's basketball team here at Nebraska on Huskers Hoops Live.
Make a difference for kids, for people in poverty, for the environment. Join AmeriCorps and get things done right here in Nebraska. With lots of different programs to choose from, you can serve in your area of passion and develop your skills while earning money to pay for college or to repay student loans. All programs are filling AmeriCorps positions to start September 1st. Learn more and apply at serve.nebraska.gov. Sponsored by Serve Nebraska. Aired with the Nebraska Broadcasters Association and this station.
Air, fundamental to all living things, and it's all thanks to trees. Not only do trees supply oxygen, they also provide homes to wildlife, filter water, and let's not forget their natural beauty. But the trees need your help. The Nebraska Arbor Day Foundation is doing their part to revitalize forests across the country, and you can help. Donate to the Nebraska Arbor Day Foundation today by visiting www.arborday.org. Be that breath of fresh air and ensure forests live on for future generations.
This is Logan.
What's up, everyone?
Logan's been going to UNL for 4 years now.
I know everything that's going on here.
Logan is somewhat informed about campus events.
Like the football game? And I think there's some kind of election, I think.
Don't be like Logan. Pick up a copy of the Daily Nebraskan or follow them on Facebook and Twitter. Not only can you be updated with events on campus, you can read profiles on some of the most interesting people around Lincoln and get unique coverage found nowhere else. Because keeping up with the news is one of the most important things a student can do.
What are you still doing with all those old t-shirts that don't even fit anymore? Why not get rid of them by donating them to Goodwill of Lincoln? Goodwill of Lincoln is a not-for-profit organization that takes nearly any household item and item of clothing. Its main mission is willing workers employed and community resources maximized. Goodwill also provides a safe environment for people with mental, physical, and emotional disabilities to be employed. So what are you still doing with those t-shirts? Your freshman 15 is less noticeable in a slightly bigger shirt anyway. Donate the small ones to Goodwill of Lincoln. To contact Goodwill of Lincoln, go to lincolngoodwill.org.
Exaggerating high school athletic achievements to your new college friends. Promising your new college friends that you'd a partial football scholarship to no-name state in Montana. What are these, you ask? These are the symptoms of someone with high school peaker syndrome, or HSPS. HSPS is a serious mental health condition that affects college students post-high school athletics. Thankfully, there is a cure to this crippling disease known as the UNL men's rugby team. UNL men's rugby team offers students the opportunity to relive those glory days. Tackle your HSPS head-on by visiting the rugby team's website at unlrugby.com.
For a little extra help settling in at college, look to UNL's first-year experience and transition programs. You can receive one-on-one student coaching and tutoring to get you through that tough course, or you can attend free workshops for information on stress, money, even jobs and internships. First-year experience and transition programs will assist you with academic support or general life skills to make your experience at UNL successful. Stop by First-Year Experience and Transition Programs located at 127 Love Library South.
Jake Schrantz back with you here on Huskers Hoops Live. Thanks for joining me here on finals week in UNL's campus. Students heading home pretty soon for the holiday break. And the college basketball season is really starting to heat up at this point. Let's get into now the Nebraska men's basketball past week because, folks, it was very up and down. I was a little bit shocked by this first game. Let's get into it now. Nebraska loses to Minnesota 76-65 after getting outscored 52-26 in the second half. That's getting doubled up on, in other words, here in the second half. Nebraska took a 15-point lead into halftime, and things were looking pretty good. Bryce Williams was cooking early on, and he finished with a team-high 18 points, but he ended up fouling out. And when Nebraska was looking to make one last push for that kind of last run to work themselves back into a game, maybe force overtime, didn't end up successfully happening. A lot of the reason was because Bryce Williams wasn't out there with foul trouble, and he was fouled out eventually. But the big question after this game was, is this the most disappointing game for Nebraska under head coach Fred Hoiberg? I was speaking to a few people in between the Minnesota game and Michigan State this weekend, and a lot of people I talked to agreed with me that was probably the most disappointing game after the Creighton game. That was the game right before it. It was two back-to-back that had a lot of people wondering, is this Nebraska team really as good as we thought it was going to be? I mean, it's less of an expected loss like the Creighton one was, and Nebraska was supposed to be good this year. I think they still will be. And they had a 15-point lead over a lesser Minnesota team that I personally think did not make the type of improvements that Nebraska did in the offseason. But to go out and blow that lead, give up 52 points in the second half to Minnesota on the road, was really tough to watch. I mean, I have to give all respect to the Gophers for shutting up Nebraska fans for another game. That's two in a row where the Huskers were kind of scratching their heads, and a lot of Husker fans were as well, just a little bit confused about if this team was actually the team that we thought they were. And it's kind of hard to describe how the vibes were with everyone around me after we watched this game together. I mean, I heard rumblings of, is this team even a postseason team? And I think those were valid questions to ask after watching that performance against Minnesota. The Huskers go 5 for 18 from 3, as opposed to 8 for 25 from deep for Minnesota. So not that different. It's 32% as opposed to Nebraska's 28%. Huskers go 12 for 15 from the free throw line. Minnesota goes 18 for 29 from the free throw line. So when you really look at it, if it's a better shooting night for Minnesota from the free throw line, that's probably an even worse loss, you have to think, for Nebraska, as Minnesota would extend that lead a lot more with the free throw shooting improvements. And you look at it, how the Gophers were able to do it, they pretty much did all their damage without Dawson Garcia on the floor. He was hobbled in the first half, barely played in the second half, if at all. He's their leading scorer. He had 36 the game prior against Ohio State in a loss, and Minnesota was able to do it without him. They were led mostly by Josh Ola-Joseph and Elijah Hawkins, who put up 12 points and 11 assists in a double-double. They got some pretty good guard play from Hawkins. And overall, Nebraska going on this 2-game losing streak was very disappointing after having their best start to a season in 30 seasons. Started 7-0 with a lot of hype going into the Creighton game, dropped 2 in a row, heading into this weekend's matchup with Michigan State. And there were a lot of questions. Was this Nebraska team as much of an improved roster as we thought it was? And they were going to have to answer those questions in Lincoln against MSU, and answer them they did. Huskers take down the Spartans at home in men's basketball, 77-70, in a pretty hard-fought, pretty back-and-forth battle for the team's first Big Ten win of the season. Nebraska returned to home, where they had recently just lost to Creighton, and they looked like the team we'd been watching all season long before those two losses. I mean, it was a team that was fighting hard on the glass, really were competing defensively for 35 full seconds every possession, and they were firing away from downtown at a pretty effective rate. You look at the rebound differential, they still tied on the glass with the Spartans, but it was a 31-31 tie. I'll take 31 rebounds in a regulation game every day of the week. That's a pretty effective day on the glass. Nebraska goes 10 for 23 from three-point range, which after looking back at the box scores, it was kind of a weird coincidence that the Huskers played Michigan State in men's and women's basketball on Saturday, and then Sunday, and both the women's team and the men's team shoot 10 for 23 from three-point range against the same school. That's got to be a weird coincidence, no? I would think that's a very unusual thing that would happen. But Nebraska goes 2-0 against Sparty this weekend in basketball. That's pretty awesome to see. Michigan State very routinely is a good basketball school, so to be able to pull that off is nice to see. We'll start here with Juwan Gary. He tied his career high that he set against Oregon State a few weeks ago. He had 20 points against the Spartans in that one, and that was really good to see. He kind of finally found the range again from distance after going 2 for 10 from the stretch between Fullerton and Minnesota from downtown. And he was overall 8 for 11 from the field and only took 4 threes. He made 2 of them. So I think that's kind of the sweet spot for the shooting splits for Juwan Gary. I think him keeping the defenses honest with 3 or 4, maybe 5 three-pointers on any given night if he's feeling himself is a good range. I don't want to see him having anything near what we saw Baylor Shireman put up against the Huskers, where he went like 6 for 19 from 3, I think it was, which is kind of a crazy split for one guy. But it allows him to kind of shoot those threes to be effective that way and also still be able to drive in and make a difference in that way. But we are going to step aside here on Huskers Hoops Live. When we come back, we'll have our special guest, Justice Rohde, joining me on the show.
Getting involved on campus, meeting new friends, and networking for the future can seem scary, but Scarlet Guard makes it easy for both graduate and undergraduates. Social events help students connect with others around campus, while the professional events help students network with alumni from around the globe. Possibilities within Scarlet Guard are endless, so join today. Go to huskeralum.org/ScarletGuard or contact the Nebraska Alumni Association. Students today, alumni tomorrow, Huskers forever.
Imagine what it would be like to live in a different country for a month, a couple months, or even a year. You may think,
I don't have money for that.
Or,
it won't fit into my 4-year college plan.
But the Education Abroad office at UNL wants you to know an education abroad is possible for anyone. There are over 400 scholarships to help fund your trip and an advising staff ready to assist with all the planning. So set up your advising session today. Go to educationabroad.unl.edu. The world is waiting for you. Imagine never being able to drive, to watch TV, or even read Harry Potter. Reading is essential to our lives. City Impact Reading Center helps Lincoln Public Elementary Schools boost their students' reading scores by getting all students at or above their grade's reading level. Each week, volunteers of all ages go sit and read with students. You can help a student gain an important life skill and help change their future. If you're looking for some rewarding volunteer experiences, please visit their website at cityimpact.org.
Air, fundamental to all living things, and it's all thanks to trees. Not only do trees supply oxygen, they also provide homes to wildlife, filter water, and let's not forget their natural beauty. But the trees need your help. The Nebraska Arbor Day Foundation is doing their part to revitalize forests across the country, and you can help. Donate to the Nebraska Arbor Day Foundation today by visiting www.arborday.org. Be that breath of fresh air and ensure forests live on for future generations.
Jake Schrontz back with you on Huskers Hoops Live, breaking down men's basketball right now with our very special guest, Justice Rohde, hopping on with us here on KRNU and the Huskers Hoops Live YouTube channel. Justice, how you doing this morning, man?
I'm doing amazing. Thank you so much for having me. It's an honor to be on such a prestigious live program as this one, so I appreciate you taking the time to have me.
Yeah, man. Yeah, we're talking Nebraska men's basketball, specifically Michigan State at this point. So first off, give me your thoughts on that performance for Nebraska first, then we'll get into Michigan State a little bit.
So I thought for the first half was a little shaky, right? I mean, home environment, Tom Izzo coach team, it was a little rough. Not a whole lot of offensive stuff was clicking. There wasn't a whole lot of continuity there. They had to figure out the lineups a little bit. And I think they came out in the second half and they did a great job adjusting. To only be down 5 at half when Michigan State's shooting their best game all year, when they're giving you pretty much their A- punch. I mean, to take that, go into the half down 5 is a small win. Then you come out. They showed intensity. They look really. I didn't think with this Fred Hoiberg coach team that they could replace the kind of facilitating that Derek Walker had from the big position. To have a guy like Rink Mass be willing to test the defense and show some facilitation, especially as a guy who's a transfer, maybe not the level of playmaker that Derek Walker was, but to have him have the courage to test the defense on a couple of different back cuts, make some nice passes, make some plays down the stretch, and to see the team finally shoot some clutch free throws, make them, that's a big, big time win.
And something else with Rink that I was impressed with was he was struggling on the glass for the last few games. Creighton and Minnesota, he really couldn't get into any sort of physical, matchups with some of the bigs. Obviously, Ryan Kalkbrenner, one of the best in the country. So I don't think anyone was really expecting Rink to go win that matchup one-on-one on the glass or on the defensive side of the ball. But against Michigan State, who doesn't have the tallest guys or the biggest guys, Matty Sissoko is still a unit inside. Around 6'9", 250, I think he was on the roster. So how do you think he played on the glass?
I was really impressed with his level of physicality. I thought as the game got a little bit more contentious, as things started to get a little dicey between the two teams, I thought he was able to step up his level of play really well. He threw his frame around, which is something he hadn't done in a while. And obviously he was playing against Kalkbrenner, and then I thought Minnesota did a great job just eliminating him on the glass. Jonathan Ola-Joseph was just putting in a shift, making sure he couldn't get anything, and to advantage that Nebraska had. But for Rink Mass to come out and play the way he did, he responded because Matar Diop came into the game because they needed to infuse some energy, some athleticism, some length in the game, because Rink Mass in the first half just did not have the level of aggression that the kind of quality of game demanded. To come out in the second half, respond like that, throw your frame around, and willingly dominate the glass is the kind of performance I think Fred Hoiberg expected and all the fans really want to see.
And that front court for Nebraska was a pretty big question mark because you go into that game without Josiah Alec, who has obviously been starting pretty much all season for Nebraska. So you get Juwan Gary in the starting lineup. You get, like you mentioned, Matar Diop coming in as well. And then Eli Rice getting some minutes as well off the bench. I know me and you are big Eli Rice fans. So I want to just get your opinion on the way that Juwan Gary played in the starting lineup. Another 20-point game, his second of the season. Do you think that when Josiah's back from an injury or wherever he was out for, you think he's probably going to come off the bench going forward? I think Juwan did a pretty good job.
It makes you wonder because, first of all, credit to Juwan. Amazing game, incredible performance. That's what big-time players should do in a game like that. He's going to raise some real question marks because he started kind of before he got hurt. He was really getting into a role last year. And now he's kind of coming back, and he's, really making a case to play his way into the starting lineup. It's just because I think Josiah offers you a little bit of a different element in the starting lineup. He's more of a vertical spacer where he can get up and he can go get the ball if you need him to. Not a terrible inside scorer. And there's some real elements where defensively, he did a job on Kalkbrenner where I think without Josiah Alec in that game, Kalkbrenner probably goes for 30 and 15. Which in like a game where Creighton looked like they wouldn't miss in an elementary school parking lot. So you're going to raise some real questions. It gives you a different look. If you want some more offensive punch, I think Fred probably looks at Juwan Gary and goes, he's probably the better offensive player. And he's not a negative defensively. He's a pretty decent defender.
I would agree with that. And I feel like going into this season, I feel like most of the talk was that Josiah would probably come off the bench and be that energy guy off the bench for the Nebraska front court, kind of diving for loose balls, bodying up against some of the Big Ten bigs. And if nothing else, he could be someone that you go out there and just get some fouls, an advantage for your team. But I want to talk about the closing five defensively. We didn't see a lot of Jamarcus Lawrence in the big minutes in the end. It was a lot of Sam Hoiberg. We saw it at times last year, and it was very successful. Again, it's successful here. How are you feeling about Jamarcus Lawrence? Because he's not been the same type of player that we saw at the end of last season.
I look at it like this. I think there's been one big struggle for Jamarcus that's really predicated a lot of his early season deficits so far, and that's been the inside finishing. Whenever he gets to the rim, a lot of the easy looks you saw him converting last year that allowed him to get buckets and allowed him to get extra looks at the free throw line. And, while he wasn't the most incredible free throw shooter last year, I think he's taken a step up in that regard. The real detriment to his game right now is he cannot finish inside for whatever reason. A lot of the bunny looks, like there was a couple times where he had some really good looks in the floater range, about 8 to 10 feet, and he just couldn't get him to drop. And it just seemed like everybody else was getting him to drop. And it's not really a touch thing with him. It's just he's got to dial something in. Something's a little wonky there. And defensively, he's 6'2", 6'3". In a closing game, a guy like Sam Hoiberg, who's going to be a little bit more physical, a little bit more aggressive against a guard like Tyson Walker, who was lighting it up down the stretch, who ended up he had 10 of his points in the back half of the second half, right? In the last 10 minutes, he had 10 points. Mm-hmm. So you need a guy like Sam Hoiberg who's going to be willing to chase and put in a shift. And, while Jamarcus Lawrence has struggled, if he can figure out some of the inside finishing stuff, I think he'll be fine. I think that's just kind of one of those games where he wasn't going to be a factor defensively down the stretch, so you had to throw in Sam Hoiberg.
And we mentioned earlier, just a few minutes ago, about the impact of players like Matar Diop and Eli Rice. But I'm looking down the bench, and I'm seeing Ramel Lloyd there, who hasn't seen action since he's come back off the red shirt last year. And it's getting to the point in the season where you only have a couple more non-conference games left until you're facing teams like Michigan State on a nightly basis. So I'm personally thinking, if you don't put him in now, when are you going to get him in? Because this rotation is starting to set at this point in the season, and it's going to be tough, I would think, to just throw him in there against a random Illinois on a Wednesday night in February.
Yeah, and he adds a level of dynamism and a level of insides, a level of self-creation that I do not think this team has ever seen. I am of the opinion that we're gonna get a stretch against North Dakota, South Carolina State, and then we're going to play Indiana in January. Indiana can't shoot the ball. Let's call the spade. They can't shoot the ball. South Carolina State, God bless them, they're not Michigan State. North Dakota, not the same caliber of opponent that you're going to see in Northwestern. Those are the type of games where he needs to get real looks. I'm talking 10-plus minutes of, get him the ball, let's see some self-creation. Because I think Jerron Coleman, after the Minnesota game, played his way out of the rotation, stalling possessions and taking outright bad looks and missing pretty easy playmaking opportunities. God bless the guy. He's a 6-year transfer, but he literally played his way out of the rotation with that game, in my opinion. And so you got to have a guy like Ramel Lloyd, especially for Big Ten play where you need a guy like self-creation. Casey Tominaga can't carry the self-creation load because he's going to have nights where, let's go back to the Duquesne game. He did not have a great shooting night. There's going to be games like that where he just will not have great shooting nights and needs a self-creation partner. And if Bryce Williams is going to get 3 shots in the second half like he did against Minnesota and show a lack of aggression in big-time moments, you got to have a guy who's willing to go get a punch. You got to see what Ramel Lloyd could do against teams like North Dakota and South Carolina State.
And it concerns me because I think my biggest criticism so far of the Fred Hoiberg era is he hasn't proven to me that he can actually go out and recruit a legitimate point guard. We've seen Sam Griesel last year make some big plays, but that's a transfer who's from Lincoln who, frankly, probably would have came back here because he wanted to play for the Huskers. He probably would have came back here for whatever coach was here. I know he said Fred Hoiberg was a big reason for that, but I feel like he wasn't the only reason for that. And Ramel Lloyd is by far the best point guard that the Huskers have recruited here. It was, I think, a 4-star prospect out of Sierra Canyon. So if you redshirt him his freshman year, you don't play him his second year, what would he be waiting here for instead of transferring out like somebody like Wilhelm Breidenbach did, or going somewhere else where he'll actually get minutes and show what he can do? I don't know why they're so hesitant to play him, but let's move on now to Kansas State. First off, I don't know your history. Have you ever been to Kansas State at all before?
I haven't been to Kansas State, but I've seen a lot of their basketball. So the fans get a little rowdy.
Yeah, I think we're in for a pretty fun atmosphere. And for any of the fans who don't know, me and you will be traveling to Kansas State this Sunday for a very big basketball game. 2 8-2 basketball teams going at it on the road for Nebraska. And what do you think we should expect from that game with Kansas State?
So Kansas State's going to come into this one. They lost their big, Naquan Tomlin. He was released from the team for a violation of team policy, indefinite suspension after an incident off the court. He will not be returning to the team. He has entered his name into the transfer portal. They lose their best big. That's a humongous blow for Kansas State. They are, however, a really, really good team. Their number one problem is they turn the ball over way too much. And that's going to happen with a guy like Tyler Perry, who's been absolutely electric for them. He's, when he plays against an average, he's better. He's like about 5 points better than an average guard, which is insane in college basketball.
Yep.
Like, he's giving you 5 extra points a night than an average guard couldn't. And he's playing 87% of their minutes, which is a huge chunk of the load. He's a big guy, the transfer from North Texas. And then Arthur Kaluma, who entered his name into the NBA draft process last year, withdrew, entered the transfer portal. He ends up at Kansas State. That's a real coup by Jerome Tang to get a guy like that. He's been playing 74% of their minutes. He's been another guy who's about 3.5, 4 points better than the average C1 player, which is really good numbers, and he's just a jumbo athlete. He's a 6'7" wing, just athletic, gets up, gets out of the gym, and he's willing to get after it on the boards. And then Cam Carter is another guy, the 6'3" junior, who didn't really have a humongous factor in last year's March Madness team, but he's playing 86% of their minutes this year, along with Tyler Perry, about 3 points better than the average D1 guard. So they got a three-headed punch that's going to, really take it. This is kind of the talent level that Nebraska hasn't seen. I know they've seen Creighton. This is a little bit more dynamic than Creighton.
It's almost a big three. I was looking at the stats so far for all three of those guys that you mentioned. They all average over 16 points per game, which in college basketball, in a 40-minute basketball game, that's insane. I mean, to be able to get a big three like that can be that consistent so far this season. And they're 8-2 with some pretty big wins. And I want to focus on Arthur Kaluma a little bit because Nebraska obviously saw him a few times while he was with Creighton. And I think that's going to be an interesting matchup, especially with how Josiah Alec, he was out last game. We'll see if he's back on Sunday, but if he's not, it's probably going to have to be Jawan Gary and company, maybe Matar Diop again off the bench, kind of just blitzing him every time he gets the ball because he is one of the best scorers in the Big 12 at this point.
Yeah, it's going to be really interesting. You will probably see a lot more hard doubles. You will probably see, like you said, some blitzes. There will be points where Jawan Gary will just put his, he'll get all up in his business and he'll make him put the ball on the deck because Kaluma's not very comfortable putting the ball on the deck. That was the number one criticism of his the NBA draft. Is like, yeah, he's an okay shot maker. Yeah, he's a heck of an athlete, but you make him put the ball on the floor, it's going to get a little dicey. I'm interested to see what they do against Tyler Perry because I know you guys have seen Max Asmus from Oral Roberts, who's at Texas now. This is a different cat. I mean, I saw a little bit of his film because he's from Spiro, Oklahoma. I've seen a little bit of his film. He's a completely different guy. I mean, if you give him an inch, he'll take a mile. He is as quick as a cat getting out of the box. He is shifty, quick, and then Cam Carter, he's a little bit different guy. He's willing to take whatever shots are given to him. He's more of a, he's comfortable making the kind of shots that, these difficult 18-foot pull-ups. So they got, 3 different styles of guys that Fred Hoiberg's going to have to game plan for, whereas, Creighton was more of like a homogenous group. They kind of do all the same thing. They work in a system. These are just athletes who are going out and playing, and Jerome Tank's done a great job developing them and honing their skills to be as effective as they are.
And guard play is something that Nebraska's kind of struggled with defensively this season. You remember how Stephen Ashworth was going off at early points in the game against Creighton. You remember Day Grant for Duquesne started to feel himself a little bit. But Nebraska actually saw Kansas State last year. But this is a very different Kansas State team here in 2023, in the 2023-24 season. They lose Keontae Johnson and Marquise Noel. Explain to everyone why that's so big, because those guys were special last year for the Wildcats.
Oh, it's huge because you have a guy like Keontae Johnson who's willing to vertically space the floor, and he's a lob threat at any point. I mean, that's a dude who's got a 42-inch vertical, and he's not afraid to show it. And Marquise Noel's a little bit of a different point guard to Tyler Perry, where Marquise Noel is, obviously you see the flash, you saw the deep threes, you saw the fake argument with Jerome. Everybody sees all the highlight plays. He was also big at the point of attack on defense and spearheading their kind of keeping them connected and spearheading their defensive effort. And he really tied them together playmaking wise and getting everybody. He was so good at making sure all of his guys stayed involved and connected on offense, getting guys touches when they needed it. And so this is a completely remolded K-State team because this is more of a scoring punch. It's not like a homogenous offensive unit like you've seen with the K-State team in the past where that's oh, yeah, okay, here's these two guys. They're great, but they work in a system. These are just, it's like an AAU team in college. I mean, it's guys who are really good at basketball going and get buckets.
And something I found interesting, I was going through their schedule last night, and their last two games were wins over Villanova and LSU. They haven't lost a game since Miami on November 19th. But looking up and down their schedule, they've already played 4 overtime games, including 3 back-to-back-to-back with Oral Roberts on November 28th all the way through that Villanova game last Tuesday. I'm thinking that could be something that could have an impact in this game on Sunday. If it's a close ball game, I don't think Kansas State's going to get flustered at all, especially on their home floor.
No, but also it comes down to the fact that they also got lit up defensively. There were some. I watched a little bit of the film from the Villanova game. They got back cut so many times, and Villanova's one of the best cutting teams in the country. That's still a holdover from the Jay Wright era. They will cut forever. And Oral Roberts, they've got a system offensively. They'll just pick at mismatches whenever they want to. The North Alabama one, I was really surprised by. They win at the buzzer there. It's a tough win. It's a gritty win. You need that one. But there were some points where Kansas State has looked really, really bad defensively because, again, while you lose Naquan Tomlin, and they are – I'm making sure I'm looking at this right. They're bottom 100 in block percentage. They don't protect the rim at an incredibly high rate. They'll alter shots, but nobody's going up like Naquan Tomlin was in March Madness last year in erasing stuff. So I think that's been a big part of their issues is losing a guy like that for basically the entire season. And now you have to go in and play a team like Nebraska who's, looking up and down their schedule outside of USC is probably the biggest team you'll see.
Yeah, and Kansas State is, they're 8-2 right now, but if you think about all those overtime games, those are all at that point 50-50. You go to overtime, you never know what could happen. You mentioned a win at the buzzer. This team is 8-2. They could very well have been, 4-4 or anything like that. So it's crazy the way that their season has turned out, and they've had some pretty impressive performances. But overall, just kind of final thoughts before we end this segment. What's the biggest thing you think Nebraska needs to bring from this Michigan State game and bring that in against Kansas State to pick up the win?
The physicality in the second half. You have to go in. You have to throw your weight around. And you have to make Kansas State feel it. If they don't have a rim-protecting presence, now they don't have a guy over 6'8" on the roster. You better go in. The ball better get at least a paint touch every single possession. Every time that they're on the glass, 3-4 bodies have to hit the glass. You got to throw your weight around, impose your will, make Kansas State have to defend for long possessions, and make them have to defend the inside.
Yeah, I completely agree. I feel like the rebounding is what got Nebraska to that 7-0 start, the best start in 30 seasons. And to not continue to bring that to every single game would be a disservice to the way that they've built all this success early on. But Nebraska, chance to go 9-2 to start the year this weekend against Kansas State. They won't play a game until that one on Sunday, so they go from a Sunday to a Sunday. So they should be pretty fresh, and I think it should be a pretty good game this weekend. So excited to travel over there to Manhattan with you. And Justice, thank you for joining me here on Huskers Hoops Live.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. It's been great. It's been great talking ball with you, and looking forward to traveling down to Manhattan and see what those Kansas State crazies have in store.
Oh, yeah. It should be our fun first experience, my first road game as a broadcaster. So make sure you all are tuned into that here on KRNU on Sunday afternoon. Me and Justice will be on the call for that one. I'm going to step aside here on Huskers Hoops Live one more time. When we come back, we'll preview this weekend's game with Southern University for the Huskers women's basketball team.
The risk of an American man developing cancer in his lifetime is a little less than 1 in 2. The risk of an American woman developing cancer in her lifetime is a little more than 1 in 3, but the death rates of cancer have been declining in men and women since the early 1990s.
I relay for the support of my sister.
I relay for the support of my grandfather.
I relay for the support of my uncle.
Keep helping those in need by participating in Relay for Life. Join us for Relay for Life at the University of Nebraska-Lincoln each year to fight back against cancer. Sign up for your community event or donate at relayforlife.org.
Getting involved on campus, meeting new friends, and networking for the future can seem scary, but Scarlet Guard makes it easy for both graduate and undergraduates. Social events help students connect with others around campus, while the professional events help students network with alumni from around the globe. Possibilities within Scarlet Guard are endless, so join today. Go to huskeralum.org/Scarlet Guard or contact the Nebraska Alumni Association. Students today, alumni tomorrow, Huskers forever.
Exaggerating high school athletic achievements to your new college friends. Promising your new college friends a UTA partial football scholarship to no-name state in Montana. What are these, you ask? These are the symptoms of someone with high school peaker syndrome, or HSPS. HSPS is a serious mental health condition that affects college students post-high school athletics. Thankfully, there is a cure to this crippling disease known as the UNL men's rugby team. UNL men's rugby team offers students the opportunity to relive those glory days. Tackle your HSPS head-on by visiting the rugby team's website at unlrugby.com.
The opportunity to grow your own fruits and vegetables the way you like them is right at your fingertips. In neighborhoods just like yours, Community Crops lends various plots of land to families in which they can grow their own food. Join hundreds of families in the Lincoln community as they work this spring planting and harvesting crops in the city's 15 gardens. Start today by registering for the Community Crops Training Program, or to learn more, visit www.communitycrops.org.
Dad, I'm hungry. Why don't we have anything to eat?
Those are words you never want to hear as a parent. But unfortunately, putting food on the table is a constant struggle for many low-income families here in Lincoln, and they don't have the necessary skills to get and maintain a job. They rely on volunteers at the Center for People in Need that can help them through the struggle. You can make a difference in their lives by getting involved in one of the many volunteer programs that the Center for People in Need offers. For more information, please visit centerforpeopleinneed.org.
Jake Schrantz back with you here on Huskers Hoops Live, wrapping up week number 8 of the season here on Huskers Hoops Live. Got going in the preseason, and we've been with you every single Tuesday morning for breakdowns and reactions to all of this Nebraska ball news. And let's get into a preview coming up for this week's game against Southern University for the women's basketball team. They play on Sunday. Southern is 1-6 on the year, with one of the hardest non-conference schedules that I think I've seen a Nebraska opponent have so far this year. I was looking at their schedule earlier on. They started with 6 straight losses. They have a 1-6 record. They started 0-6. They won their recent game. Let me double check who it was against. It was against a small school. It was Louisiana Christian University. They won 101-45, but looking at their non-conference schedule, they played Baylor, Texas, Purdue, Miami, Iowa State, and Northwestern State. So kind of a crazy non-conference schedule. It seems like every big Power 6 or Power 5 program, whatever you want to call it here in college basketball, wants to put Southern on their roster early on to get their team into a rhythm. Taylor Williams, a 5'8 guard there at Southern, she kind of leads the scoring effort with 9.7 points per game for Southern University. She's the leading scorer, but no player averages over 10 points per game for Southern so far this year. So I think Nebraska is going to have a pretty good chance of picking up another win in that one. The Huskers on the season are 8-2 overall, a chance to go 9-2 with a win against Southern. Another chance to go 9-2 on the year is the men's basketball team as they match up with the Kansas State Wildcats on the road this Sunday. We mentioned it before on the discussion with Justice. Me and him will be there in Manhattan on Sunday for the call. So if you guys want to listen to the game, I think it's on like Big 12 now on TV. So if you guys don't have that in your package, we can provide that for you. We can broadcast the game for you. And Kansas State is led by Cam Carter, Arthur Kaluma, and Tyler Perry, who all average over 16 points per game. Really good numbers for all three top scorers. But overall, Kansas State is just 7th out of 14 teams in the Big 12 in points per game as a team. They average just a hair shy of 81 points per game so far this year. Not bad offensive numbers, pretty solid, pretty good consistency. But we mentioned all the overtime games and how that could be something Nebraska looks to exploit, how they haven't really been that much better than most of the teams that they've beat. They've had to go to overtime. They've played in close games. So if Nebraska can figure out how to bring the momentum they had from Michigan State on Sunday, bring it all the way till this upcoming Sunday, that's going to be a pretty fun game to watch. Cam Carter is 8th in the Big 12 in scoring per game, and Arthur Kaluma is 10th in the Big 12 in scoring per game. So 2 top 10 conference scorers for the Wildcats. Pretty impressive stuff, but they are bottom 4 in three-point percentage so far this year at 32% as a team from downtown. So that's also something we could be seeing how Nebraska manages. They did a good job against Michigan State, who was one of the worst three-point shooting teams in the Big Ten. Now they have to be able to put that performance up defensively against a team in the Big 12. So it should be a pretty fun game. The atmosphere is going to be electric. Justice and I will be there. But that's pretty much all I have for you today on Huskers Hoops Live. Thank you for joining me once again. Tuesday mornings, 8 to 9 a.m. Central Time, every Tuesday during the basketball season. I mentioned earlier on the show, finals week here at UNL. I'll have one more show live here in Lincoln next Tuesday before I head home for the holiday break. The rest of the shows will be pre-recorded until we return in early January. Not too many shows pre-recorded. I believe only about 1 or 2, maybe 3 will be pre-recorded, but they'll still be up at 8 to 9 a.m. Central Time on KRNU. Won't be on the Huskers Hoops Live YouTube channel, but you can listen in on KRNU for those episodes. But thank you for joining me here this week on the show. And with that being said, go Big Red.
Playing the best college music since 1970.